welcome to the ROCK's online worship experience. We're so glad you decided to stream into our service today. Get ready to have an exciting worship experience that is sure to transform your life. Whatever you need from God at this very moment, He is able to provide and do so much more. Now, before the service begins, there are a few things we invite you to do. 1, while you're worshiping with us online, feel free to interact with our online ministers in the chat and share this broadcast with your family and friends so they too can enjoy this online experience. 2, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Simply search for Dr. Dana Carson and click subscribe. On this channel, you'll find a host of kingdom resources that will help you build on the spiritual foundation that God has laid in your life. And 3, follow the Rock WOI on Facebook and Instagram to connect with us and discover all the Rock is doing. Now get ready to shake off all your worries and stresses and experience the power of God in your life. Service will begin soon.
Today we have all kinds of definitions and subjective interpretations of what the church is, totally neglecting sound principles of biblical hermeneutics and exegesis. In my book, Why We Gather, I discuss the linguistical meanings of the word church that helps us to get a better handle of the concept and the meaning of the church. In the Older Testament, can I teach? Somebody tell me I can teach. Can I teach? Can I teach? Can I teach? Or have you been spoiled with people telling you about, don't worry about your haters. Your best is around the corner. You better want to know what God's word says. You in the church, baby. Now, in the Older Testament, there were 2 different words that denoted gathering of the chosen people or their representatives. So, in the Older Testament, the church is a New Testament creation. We don't have a church in the Older Testament. So, if you hear people say the church of the Older Testament, we don't have the church is a New Testament creation. Now, but we do have some terms. One is Edah. Edah means congregation, and 2 is Gahal, which means assembly. So when you try to understand the concept of gathering or congregation from an Older Testament perspective, these 2 terms are used. Edah, which means congregation, and Gahal, which means assembly. So when you look then at the word that is used in Matthew's gospel for church, it is the Greek term ekklesia. Ek means out. Klesia comes from another Greek term, kaleo, which means to be called. And so ekklesia speaks of a called out gathering of people. And it is that word that is used. Can I teach just a little bit? It is that word that is used to translate the word Gahal in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible. And so it is that word ekklesia. And so when we look then in the Older Testament, we find out that there is no term for the people of God that express individualism. You can only define Israel as a group, as an assembly, as a congregation, not as a person. You cannot say that person is Israel. You can say Israel is Israel, but you cannot say the individual is Israel. In the same way you cannot say that person is Israel, neither can you say that person is the church. Y'all don't like me now. And so you've been taught something, and people have been saying all kinds of stuff. And man, I was blown away. On yesterday, I saw someone post something and said that I'm a bishop in the Lord's church. And I went to see a medium, and they conjured up my grandfather and my father and my other relative, and they spoke through this woman, and I know the church doesn't like it, but I'm a bishop in the Lord's church, and I wanted to tell y'all what happened because we saw some things. And I listened, and then I looked at the chat. That's what messed me up, because everybody started asking for the address of the channeler. How do you reach them? And listen, and then they started attacking the teachings of the church. Yeah, the church told us we can't do that, man. Whatever worked for you, let it work. So you're going to become a necromancer. Paul preaches in Ephesus, and they burn all their books of witchcraft, and you're going to say witchcraft? See, this is what happens when you start understanding for yourself what the church is. See, the Bible says that once you get saved, you're added to the church. You can't be added to what you are. Acts 2:47. It says, and the Lord added to the church. Can y'all talk? Come on. And the Lord added to the church daily what? Those that were being saved. So the church is the receptacle of the saved. The saved can't be the church. The church is the receptacle of the saved. Now, so it's important that we understand that the church is not an individual. It is the whole. It is the gathering. Consider these scriptures. Just going to write them out real quickly. Matthew 16:18. Upon this rock I build my church. Was that talking about you? Matthew 18:17. Listen to them. Tell it to the church. Somebody, if you have a dispute. Matthew 18:17. Was that talking about you? No. In Matthew 18:17, if they refuse to listen to you, the church, then excommunicate them. Is that talking about an individual? No. Then Acts 5:11 says, great fear came over the whole church. Is that talking about you? Then it says in Acts 8:1, great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem. Acts 8:1. Is that talking about you? Then it says in Acts 9:31, so the churches throughout all Judea, Galilee, and Samaria had peace and multiplied. Is that talking about you? See, listen, you got to stop repeating what you hear and then saying that you are not the church. We collectively are the church. Now, there are at least 12 more citations in the book of Acts. I just did Acts. But when you go into the New Testament, there are over 100 more citations. Look them up. Paul writes that the church is both a spiritual community and it also involves a physical gathering space. Listen to what Paul writes in 1 Timothy 3:14. These things I write to you, though I hope to come to you shortly. But if I'm delayed, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God. Are you the house of God? Which is what? The church of the living God. The pillar and the ground of truth. So you can get in trouble repeating what you hear without solidifying whether or not it's true. Paul also writes this, look, 1 Corinthians 12:28. And God has appointed these in the church: first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healings, helps, administration, varieties of tongues. Is that you? One of the things I hope is that you don't walk out here ever again talking about you, the church. When we the church, you. When we confuse our understanding of the church, we confuse both the purpose of the church and we neglect the responsibility of the church. Now, it's important that we understand, if you really want to understand what the church is, you have to understand Israel. If you don't understand the role of Israel, you cannot understand the role of church. Why, Dr. Carson? Because the church replaced the role of Israel because Israel rejected Jesus as their Messiah. And so then the church was given the responsibility to represent Christ in the world, and it opened up the door for Gentiles. And so it's the day of the Gentiles. Now, does that mean we ought to put the Jewish people down? Of course not. Paul says in Romans 11:11 that Israel rejected Christ as the Messiah. Their rejection of Christ as the Messiah opened the door for the Gentiles to come in. Had they not rejected him, the Gentiles would not have been engrafted in the olive tree, which means then Paul writes in Romans 11 and says, and just like God engrafted the Gentiles into the faith, he will once again engraft the Jews back in. But right now, this is the day of the Gentile. That means that there's going to be a time where the church will be no more. And you need to understand that. In Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, it talks about the 7 churches of Asia Minor. And so they both have all the churches have both an existential and an eschatological meaning. A meaning in the here and now, historically, as well as the future and that to come. And so when you look at those 7 churches, after the 7th church in Revelations 3 and 21, chapter 4 says, come up here. And so we see the rapture. There's going to come a time where God's going to take the church out of the earth. We will not be here anymore. Now, you may say, I don't believe that, but let me tell you something. When I went to Israel, one of the things that was just emphatic to me was another reality of God. To see Bible people walking around and serving God based on their understanding of God's covenant with them. See, here's what God said about Israel. Our text is very, very powerful because in Exodus 19, it's a text of intercession. It begins with the intercession of God. God states that to the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I brought you out on eagle's wings, which meant I interceded for you. I wish there was somebody in here that said, well, hey, I wasn't in physical Egypt, but I was in spiritual Egypt, and hey, I may not got out on eagle wings, but I'm telling you, I got out. I'm a witness. God brought me out of darkness into a marvelous light. You don't know where I was, what I was doing. You don't know the shape I was in, but I want you to know God came and got me. Do I have any witnesses here? Is there anybody that God came and got you out of your mess, got you out of your circumstance, got you out of your situation, delivered you out of the mouth of the tiger, delivered you out of the mouth of the lion? Now, he says, you've seen what I can do. Look to your neighbor and say, I've seen what he can do. Is there anybody that you've ever seen what God could do? I don't know about you, but I've seen the lame walk. I've seen the deaf talk, the dumb hear. Y'all don't hear, listen. I'm saying, listen. I've heard the deaf hear, the dumb talk. I've seen what God can do. You can't tell me what he cannot do. Now listen to what he says. Then he says, I put this contingency upon you. He says, if you will pay attention to my voice. Shema. Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. Hear to the point of obedience. He says, if you will hear to the point of obedience, you will be and keep my covenant. Shamar, the same word that's used in the garden with Adam, keeping and tending. He says, if you will be sensitive about my message, my covenant, he says, you will be my personal property. You will be my valued property, my treasured possession above all people. And he says, and all the earth is mine. So, Sugalah, the Hebrew word says, God says, you will be what I value more than anything I've created. And then he says, you will be a mamlakah kohanim. You will be a kingdom of priests. This is important. You will be a mamlakah, a kingdom of kohanim, priests. A priest was an intercessor. He said, God says, I have developed Israel for the express purpose of interceding for the entire world. Thus, no one can come to me, Israel, unless they come through you. No one can say they know God unless they know God through Israel, which means Israel, people will not know who I am unless you reveal to them who I am. Thus, you are my mamlakah kohanim. You are a kingdom of priests, which means you're kingdom citizens, and your role is to be a priesthood. Now, among that priesthood was the Aaronic priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, and then Israel as a nation. As a nation, they stood in the gap for the world. Boy, I wish I could have time to talk to you a little bit about Jewish history and where the Canaanites, where the Jebusites, where the Perizzites, where are all those other ites? Where are they? They don't exist. But where are the Israelites? They're in Israel, a little strip of land surrounded by their enemies, all around their enemies. But can't nobody touch them because God said, you are a special treasure unto me. You are my mamlakah kohanim. Now, if you want to know what the church is to do, you have to understand what Israel had to do. And Israel had to proselytize. They brought other people into Judaism through obedience to Torah, obedience to circumcision, baptism, the ceremonial laws of Israel. People, when you wanted to become an Israelite, you had to embrace that way of living. They were intercessors. If you wanted God, you had to get it through them. Beloved, what are you saying, Dr. Carson? I'm saying it and I'm about to shut up. I'm saying to you, the church plays the role that Israel played in Old Testament history, which means people cannot come to God except by the church. Jesus said, upon this rock I build my church. It doesn't matter how you feel about it, because the church is the exclusive organism of God. We have so many people that's so open-minded that your brains have fallen out, that you don't believe, you have no convictions. And here is the deal. Listen, you got to believe what you believe. When I was in Israel, I watched that nation. It was amazing. Do you know every child born in Israel has to do military service? Everyone. The young ladies cannot go to college until they do 2 years of military service. The young men cannot go to college until they do 3 years of military service. Every last one. They're walking around with machine guns. I mean, automatic weapons. They're everywhere. Some people look like they got their finger on the trigger, make you look like, come on, let's move. Let's keep on, move on away from here. I mean, they everywhere. And we asked the question, why? They said, because never again. Holocaust. Never again. We rather fight and be free than live and be slaves. That's their philosophy, and they understand terrorists come into their country, and they said that they want their entire population to be able to take a terrorist down no matter where they are. So everyone in the country is militarily trained. Everybody knows how to operate automatic weapons and everything. We don't know nothing about that kind of thinking. But God raised them up. It's amazing. They got machine guns and they at the Wailing Wall. They're reading Torah with a full regalia on. God didn't replace Israel with a bunch of people that wanted to play church. Israel was to make God known. You and I, we come together to know God, to make God known, and to spread his word around the world. So, who are you and I? We're intercessors. So that means that we don't get offended with people that don't like us. We intercede for them. When people are sick, we intercede for them. When people got problems, we intercede for them. Why? Because that's what we do. We're intercessors. That's the nature of the church. You can't be running around here with unforgiveness in your heart. You can't be running around here talking about, I can't stand them, I don't like. Well, if something is wrong from, be who you are. Intercede. If you see their dysfunction, if God showed you their shortcoming, it was so that you can intercede. Why? Because you've got the ear of God. God's listening to you. So God says, pray for your brother. Pray for your sister. Pray for your enemy. Pray.
Whoa. Listen, I know that's out of the box. I know that blessed you. But you and I are intercessors of the kingdom. If this message blessed you, listen, you need to not only just order a copy for yourself, but you probably need to order some additional copies and get them out, because people are so confused about what the church is and who the church is. So I hope that I really helped you on today to stand up and be who God has called you. The world is depending on us. They can't know God without the church. And I am so delighted that you joined us today and listened to that message. Send in for a copy. Order a copy of my book, Why We Gather. It's physical gathering, a necessity. That book will bless your life. Well, Until next time, if you're ever in the Houston area, catch us on one of our 3 locations. Our Alvin campus service at 8 a.m., our Broadway campus services at 10 a.m., or our Edgebrook campus at 6 p.m. I would love to see you in person, and if you can't be here in person, join us online. Until next week, shalom.
Thank you for worshiping with us today. If you are in need of prayer or someone to talk to, our online ministers are available just for you right now in the chat. We invite you to join us again for one of our powerful worship experiences that happen every week. Sundays at 10 a.m. is the Extraordinary Worship Encounter, where you can receive an on-time kingdom word. Then Sundays at 6 p.m. is our Miracles, Signs, and Wonders services, where you can receive any breakthrough you've been looking for. And Wednesdays at 7 p.m., join us for Understanding the Bible with Dr. Dana Carson, where you can get your biblical questions answered. We look forward to connecting with you. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Simply search for Dr. Dana Carson and click subscribe. On this channel, you will find a host of kingdom resources that will help you build on the spiritual foundation that God has laid in your life. And then follow The Rock WOI on Facebook and Instagram to connect with us and discover all that The Rock is doing. You can also get connected with us on our website at therockwoi.com. Again, thank you for worshiping with us, and be blessed.